Thank you for downloading this podcast from The Reedy Clubby Show on Talk Radio 702 and 567 Cape Talk. For more, please go to 702.co.za or capetalk.co.za.
Your family, your community, your country, your responsibility. Be the best citizen you can be. Find the Bill of Rights on leadersay.co.za.
Let's welcome Buluko Dau, who is a reporter for the Star newspaper. Good morning to you, Buluko.
Good morning, Brady.
Thank you very much for giving us your time. And Monica Lagan-Passad, who's also with the Sunday Times, a reporter for the Sunday Times, and has been writing, both of them have been writing eyewitness accounts of what they saw at Marikana. Monica, a pleasure to have you here.
Good morning, Brady. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just get this right. You are both at Marikana at the moment, am I right?
Correct.
Yes.
Absolutely. Buluko, I want to start with you. I read your piece about the bloodbath claims man in green blanket. Talk to me about your interactions with him. What is it about this man that stood out for you as opposed to the hundreds of thousands of miners who were there?
Look, the miners, the striking miners, they had about 5 leaders whom we met in our first interaction with the miners. You know, there were no police around. We just went to them, and before we could speak to anyone, we had to go through the leadership. So it happened that after they arranged for us to interview some of them, we left our business cards. Mm-hmm. And they just chose to call me. You know, that's how I first met this man. Mm. You know, whenever they called me, it was him on the line. And we'd arranged to meet far from the crowd. He'll come with Kolani, the guy who's leading the thing now. Mm. So we had that interaction. I mean, a day before he died, he was still arranging for us to meet one of the guys who were injured in the alleged shooting over the weekend. You know, so there's one person whom I really directly interacted with.
Mm-hmm. Buluko, the last part of your moving piece says, the men refused to give us any of their contact numbers or names. I received the first call the following day, Wednesday. They wanted to brief us on their position again. More calls came. I spoke with different men, including the man in the green blanket. I would have loved to talk to his colleagues, but their phone was off last night. I could not say if any of them had also been shot. I can only hope they survived the bloodbath. That last sentence is very interesting to me, that you hope they could have survived the bloodbath. Why? Did you feel a personal connection to them even as you were writing about them?
Look, I mean, I only saw the men in the green blanket, mm-hmm. lying there dead. You know, there was no sign of the other guys, the leaders that I have also interacted with or spoken to over the phone. So I was like, you know, I'm just hoping they made it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And Monica, for you, I mean, writing from the battleground, I read your piece as well in the Sunday Times, telling us, giving us the timeline of what happened on Thursday. Was it as chaotic as it sounded? Was it how difficult was it to make sense of what was happening?
Well, really, at the beginning, when it first started at 4:00, when police were lining up to begin dispersing the crowds, at first, you know, we thought it was going to be, you know, you've covered many service delivery strikes. At first, we thought it was just going to use the water cannons and the tear gas, and you assume that the people would disperse. But when the first shots were fired, it was chaos everywhere. There were bullets flying in so many different directions. You actually didn't really happening because at this stage, obviously, it's a very dusty area. It's lots of sand. So the water cannons and the tear gas and the gunfire had created this cloud of dust around it. So you couldn't actually see what was happening. It was only after the dust had settled that you could see that this was the aftermath of the reaction from the police.
Now, both of you, I want to give you both a chance to respond. Let's start with you, Monica. Given what you saw and what you reported, we have a commission of inquiry that is going to establish a whole lot of issues. And the debate that's been going on since this bloodbath has been who fired first. From what you saw, Monica, and what you wrote about, do you think that question can be answered? Who fired first?
I think there's going to be it will be difficult because there's going to be different witness statements from different people because, like I said, many people saw different things from different angles because everybody was positioned in different places. I think people right at the front line, the photographers and the police there would be able to give a better account of what happened there. I think with the video footage and the witness account, you might be able to piece together who had fired first.
Buluko, from your perspective?
I agree with Monica. You know, it would be difficult really to say who fired first, who fired the first shot. And I think it will be a mammoth task for the commission itself, you know, because it will mostly be, the strikers swayed against the cops, the police swayed. But what happened from where I was standing, the police started shooting rubber bullets, using tear gas and all that. I can't really say when did they started using live ammunition. Okay. It's very difficult to say. Not being... Pardon?
But they didn't start with the live ammunition. Or is that also difficult to say?
I'm sure they didn't start with live ammunition.
And Monica, when I read your piece as well, you talk about at 4 p.m. water cannons were used, but this didn't deter the workers. And two policemen ran back, one of them shouting, "Water, I need water." So does that, that kind of indicates that there was no live ammunition initially?
Yes, I didn't, my opinion is that I didn't say there was live ammunition before that because I'm not an expert, but just from the sound of it, it didn't sound like it to me, personally. But then when the live ammunition began, you could hear it because it was rapid gunfire. It was very quick and was over in a couple of seconds. But, for me, in my opinion, I thought that they had begun with rubber bullets, and this was what the police had said as well at the press briefing the next day, and explained how it went down.
Yeah. And Monica, were you guys just as taken aback as everyone else, or were you briefed initially that this is what is going to happen?
I was completely taken back. Initially, we were told that police were moving in and that we were going to attempt to disperse the miners, but after what had happened and how it went down, it was completely by surprise. Nobody expected it to go down the way it did. I think everybody here was left afterwards was almost like in a sense of shock. You almost couldn't believe what had happened. When you saw bodies lying on the ground and people, injured, it was almost like in a movie. It was almost surreal. For me personally, at least.
And Buluko, I want to talk to you very briefly about the mood of the miners before all of this happened, because I think those stories are also relevant. You managed to get phone numbers, you interacted with them, you were able to have communication not just with the man who passed away, the man with the green blanket, but the overall mood. When you were speaking to these guys, were you left with a sense that these are people who want to resolve this, these are desperate people, these are angry people? What was your sense of where they were at emotionally?
I think if you used just the right words, they were desperate and really angry and really steadfast to their demands. They were not going to move, or they were not going to give into anything other than having their demand being attended to. The desperation was that give us attention. Someone come talk to us, and only relevant people, meaning mine management. They were not saying give us the money now. They're saying, give us some attention. They were so desperate for that attention. They were crying for that attention. But it seemingly cops were sent through to them, and not people that they were looking for, mine management.
All right. Well, thank you both for giving us the story, sharing what you saw. And of course, for South Africans, it means that we have various sources of news and we can start having these important conversations as citizens. Monica, thank you for your time. Thank you. And Buluko, thank you very much for chatting to us.
Thanks, lady.
Thank you. Buluko Dau and Monica Lagan-Passat, they are both at Marikana. And when we come back, we are going to speak to the city press and then ultimately Enka, Ben said from Enka. Ben said was not there, but they did what I thought was a brilliant story or package analyzing various footage, videos from Eyewitness News, Reuters, E-News Channel, Al Jazeera, and he'll talk to us about what that footage says. Our lines are open for you. Give us a call. I want to be chatting to Ben Said and Lucas Ledwaba in just a moment, but let's quickly take these two calls. Ufenze, good morning to you.
Hi. I think they brought this upon themselves because we all know the miners.
Okay.
Big strikes attract media. You could write boards and say, we want to see management, or we want to talk, or where are you? Let's talk, let's meet. Then even though they don't get the time of day, but we could look back and say, look, these guys wrote this. Then they wouldn't have had to take their weapons there to strike and protest. That was just unnecessary. You can't go to a party with guns and expect to be given cake and sweets and, you're going to be fought back. So they attracted the wrong attention. So they must just live with it. They call this upon themselves.
Okay, that's Ufenze. Let's hear what Michael in Midrand has to say about this. Michael, hi.
Ready? I think the key message that needs to come up, this has taken place to prevent, similar tragedy in the future. I would like to expect radio, programs like yours and anyone in South Africa, we need to condemn this violence that's in this country. We need to condemn, the carrying of such dangerous weapons. You could see that the intentions of the miners was not really there to negotiate. It was to cause harm to fellow South Africans for that reason. So that must be really condemned. The second point is, where were the unions? Where was COSATU? When we talk about leadership, in situations like this, would I expect Barbie to go and address those people and those whoever the other opposition mind to say, guys, let's do this thing in this particular manner rather than kill each other. So
all right.
I wanted to share, and I would like to really implore people like Barbie that they must not be sitting there and criticizing. They must be out there with the people and really try and calm the situation.
That's Michael and Midrand. Your line is bad there, but we got the gist of what you said. Let's welcome Ben Said, Group News Editor for E-News Channel Africa. Ben, good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning, Reedy.
Thank you very much for joining us. And we also are joined in this conversation by Lucas Ledwaba, who is joining us from Marikana, senior journalist at the City Press. Good morning to you, Lucas, and welcome.
Good morning.
Ben, I want to start with you, how you analyzed various footage that covered this bloodbath in Marikana. For those who missed it, can you take us through that and what you were aiming to achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Reedy. I mean, I think first of all, we weren't aiming to achieve a complete picture of what happened. We were just trying to give viewers a sense of what may have happened on the day and to see if we could reach any kind of conclusions as to what may have happened. But, this is certainly not the last point on this matter. The Commission of Inquiry will be able to look into things in a lot greater detail than we can. I think we must also just give a sense of another reason of why we tried to do it, and that was because if you remember back to what happened in sort of 48 hours after the first 48 hours, it was largely an information vacuum. There was nothing coming from the police. There was no comment coming from Lonman or even the government as to what may have happened. And everybody was desperate to get a sense of how many people had died, who may have started firing. Just to take you through the video, what we essentially did was we initially looked at 3 cameras. We later got some further footage from Al Jazeera, which gave us, a slightly different version of events. But we took 3 cameras. One was our own. The other one was from Reuters, which was kind of to the left of our own. And then another one from Eyewitness News, which your company very kindly gave to us, which was to the right of our camera. And we tried to get a sense of where the miners were coming from, who may have shot first, and how, this dreadful tragedy unfolded.
And what did you find, Ben? What does it say? What does this footage say?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the scene was absolute chaos, and there did not seem to be too much in the way of planning, coordination, and leadership by whoever was in charge amongst the police on the day. It was a chaotic scene, and I think that's the first point that we can take out of it. I think the second point was the urgent calls by some police members within sort of 15, 20 seconds of the first shots going off for a ceasefire, they were shouting, suggested that something had gone drastically wrong, and the police at that point realized that, perhaps there may have been an overreaction. When we got the further footage from Al Jazeera, some very, very important other issues emerged. The first thing is that at some stage, a group of miners, were moving towards the police. Now, whether it was a mock charge, whether they were going to attack for real, we just don't know. Also, shortly after that, at least one miner was shooting at the police with a handgun. That we kind of now know for sure. And I think that is very important, obviously, in what played out subsequently. What seems to have happened after that is that the group of miners were tear-gassed. And they started scattering. They started running. One group ran towards the police, and it seems that it was that group that were running towards the police that was shot at in the main, and that's where most of the lives were lost. Again, we don't know whether they were running away from the tear gas or running towards the police in order to attack them. And that's something that, video footage alone is not going to be able to come to a conclusion on.
And of course, we must emphasize, Ben, that everything, we're not relying on just the video footage. Everything will be threshed out at the commission of
Of course. And I mean, we were very careful to say that within the piece, that this is not the last word on the matter. It is just, this is what we can ascertain from looking at the video footage available.
Ben, thank you very much for chatting to us. Thanks indeed.
Pleasure.
Ben Said, Group News Editor, E-News Channel Africa. Now, Lucas, I read your story in the City Press, The Guns of Marikana, and just my impression of it, I do think that you give such a holistic account. You take the reader through the journey, not just of a militant group of protesters, the action of the police, the shooting and so on. You start with the secret rituals may have led striking miners to believe that believe they were invincible. Why was it important, do you think, Lucas, to emphasize this aspect of the crisis?
Yeah, really, I think it was important because when reports came through that miners were on strike, that people had died, one didn't really get a sense of the kind of people that were behind the strike, or the profile of the strikers. So from speaking to a number of people and sources within the police and people on the ground here at Marikana, we managed to establish that there was a militant element among the strikers. You'll remember that the strikers said they do not belong to any union. They said they are tired of the National Union of Mine Workers, and they are not members of AMCU. So these are people who, in a way, felt powerless, that no one cared about their interests anymore. And somehow the only language they thought people would understand better would be to use force. You'll remember that by Thursday, when the tragedy unfolded, 10 people had already died.
Yes.
2 of those people were security guards who work on the mine, who were trying to stop the miners from entering one of the shafts here. The miners claimed that they were going there to collect people, in inverted commas, to collect people who had gone to work, who had not joined the strike. Some of the people were apparently killed on the premises, on the mine premises, over the weekend. So it was a sort of a build-up. And you'll remember, if you know the situation on the mines, is that people are recruited from certain parts of the country. And due to the legacy of the past, where people were made to stay in hostels according to their ethnic groups, that sort of element still exists. So you find people who, associate themselves, and they become sort of, they find comfort in safety in numbers. Sort of, you find people from Lesotho, they will be hanging out together, people from the Eastern Cape and so forth. So there was this group that was quite militant. That is the group, from what I saw, that is the group that was armed with all sorts of weapons. So, they were not carrying roses. I think one of the things we need to highlight is that these people are not carrying roses. Yes, they were striking, but they were carrying weapons, and 10 people had died by Thursday.
Yeah.
I mean, just to take you back a little bit, on Tuesday, when we first made contact with the strikers on the hill where I'm standing now, introduced ourselves as media. They were quite hostile to us, understandably so. They didn't trust anyone. But it occurred later on that while we were talking to these people and listening to their, complaints and so on, just about 200 meters from where we were, somebody was killed with a panga, I don't know, or a spear. And this was a supervisor at the mine. It's a guy who chose to go to work and not join the strikers. So that is the sort of environment that was prevailing at the time.
Yeah. Just hold that thought, Lucas. We have John in Mogale City who has something to say about the police and so on. I want to get your response to that. John in Mogale City.
Hi, Reddy. Really watching the footage over the last week and a half and all the rest of it, and having, in the previous government, having spent time in the military, one of the things that fascinates me is just how ill-prepared the police, in actual fact, were for what happened. They can argue the point as much as they want to, and I'll give you an example. In one of the footage, there is a policeman that is standing in front of a vehicle, standing in front of a police van, okay? The guys that are shooting from directly behind him. Now, in any military operation, that would be an absolute no-no. If you then see the other footage, you've got policemen that are standing on the right-hand side that are shooting behind the Nyalas that are in front of them. They're shooting diagonally across. There are other policemen on the opposite side. There's a thing called line of fire. You do not shoot across the line of fire in terms of you've got policemen standing behind you that are firing simply there. You've got a policeman that is cowering in front of a vehicle, and you can see the fear on the guy's face because the police that are behind him. What I'm saying in this whole process, and nobody wins out of this thing, and very definitely government will come out looking like chumps out of this thing. The police will come out looking badly because nobody wins in the situation. But these poor cops that were there, the policemen that were sent out to do this, were completely and utterly ill-prepared just looking at the footage. And what I think the press needs to be looking at, they need to start looking at military specialists in terms of getting them in to start making those kind of comments, because that's not what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing comments out of the press from military specialists, from policing specialists from around the world in terms of saying, how do you actually deal with this type of stuff? And what we're doing at the moment, we're bringing too much emotion into it and not enough direct 100% fact in terms of looking at that stuff. And that's why if you look at Al Jazeera, if you look at a lot of the other press companies overseas, the first thing that they would have done is they would have got in a retired military general, or they would have got in a retired security specialist that's worked in that environment. We haven't seen any of those kind of comments out of any of our press.
All right, that's a fair point, John, and I'm making the commitment to do just that, okay? But we did. I actually watched on Anchor, I still call it the E-News channel, where they did have somebody from the ISS dealing with exactly that. The problem is that sometimes when you're a viewer or a listener, you miss something and then you assume that it hasn't happened. But I take your point, John, that perhaps even if it has happened, not enough of it has happened. But Lucas, it's very difficult for those of us who are reacting to the footage that we saw. You were there, and you are saying, all of you are saying the same thing, that it was just so chaotic, and that our conversations are centering on what happened on Thursday and not everything else that happened before. What do you think about John's comments?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not a police or military
We can only
expert,
talk about what we see, yeah?
Yeah, it will be very difficult for me to comment about that. What I can tell you is that from Tuesday, the police were negotiating with the strikers, that they were in violation of a number of laws, Righteous Assemblies Act, and so on. So I think on Thursday, it got to a point where a decision was taken by the high echelons of the SAPS to say we need to disperse these people. And the message was communicated to the leaders. So from where I was standing, I saw a police nyala setting up a barbed wire. People started moving from the hill and moving towards an open field towards the west, towards the town of Marikana. But there were these people who did not move in that direction, who went along the police nyala. And where the barbed wire ended, they were expected, I think, to go into an open field and go behind the squatter camp of Nkaning and move towards the hostel. But this did not happen. And that is where I think the shooting started taking place. Because you must remember, before that, police used water cannon, stun grenades, and tear gas. So from where I was standing, it's very difficult to talk about things that happened elsewhere. I mean, I'm going to talk about what I saw. What I saw is that there were these people who were charging at the police. There was a line of police that were firing rubber bullets. These people were charging at the police. Police opened fire with rubber bullets, but these guys were not backing off. And the police ran into one of the police nyalas nearby. And that is when I started hearing automatic gunfire and saw people, falling to the ground. So you must remember that 2 policemen had been killed on Monday, and one was critically injured. He was in hospital at the time. I think he still is. So I think we must look at it from that point of view, that there was already this tension. Mm-hmm. I mean, police were facing men who were charging towards them with pangas. I saw some very scary homemade weapons there,
And you also say, Lucas, in a conversation with my producer, that if the police did not open fire, you think we would have seen more deaths there?
Well, I think so, because imagine if the police who were firing rubber bullets fled. They fled into the police nyala. Now you are left with a line of police officers who have automatic weapons. Let's say, for argument's sake, they don't open fire. What happens? Are those guys the strikers? Were they going to come there and embrace the police, or were they just going to walk past and go to the hostel? From where I was standing and from what I heard, the intention was to make a point from the strikers' point of view, to say, we want this 12,500 and we are not going to have anyone tell us to go away from here.
And Lucas, from what you saw and what you wrote, do you think that there is truth in the argument? I spoke to one miner who phoned my show last week and said that, look, a man called Stephen brought a sangoma and told us to do this and this and this, and that will be invincible. Nothing will happen to us. From what you saw, your conversations with the miners and their behavior, did they buy the story that they were empowered and nothing would happen to them? And could this then explain how brazen some of them were?
If we go back a little bit, do some research, you will find out that when people went into battle in the past, even in the violence on the East End in the early 90s, in KwaZulu-Natal in the 80s, there was this belief that people had to undergo this ritual. They would be sprinkled with herbs, and that would make them fearless and somehow invincible. So you must remember that people who are here on the mines are not people with, they are people who come from rural areas. They are very much traditional, so they believed there was that sense that, yes, we have to go through these rituals for us to be strong in battle. I don't know in battle against who, but there was that belief. Even from the number of people that we spoke to, people who work on the mines, some of them did not undergo the ritual. It was only a small group of the strikers that participated in these rituals, and they were from a certain part of the country. They share a common culture, a common language. Even in the way that they were marching and singing throughout the week, you could tell these are people who understand one another.
Lucas,
there was even the man in the green cape that Poluko wrote about appeared to be the man in authority, because even when they were marching alongside the police nyala, he was in the front leading the charge.
So we have run out of time, Lucas. I really do appreciate your time, and well done for the sterling work. Thanks indeed.
Okay,
thank you. And John, we do take your point. While I say that I saw a military analyst on one of the news channels, Enka in particular, that doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility to bring that perspective as well. I really do appreciate your speaking so strongly about it. That will be our next step. Thanks indeed.